Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another special edition of the REDL Chat. Today, we have a special guest coming from the real estate industry, and I'm really excited to see the different perspective that he will share with us. Andre is a principal lawyer at Sharrock Pitman Legal in Melbourne. He heads the property law group and is an accredited specialist in property law. Andre assists business owners of all sizes, from retail businesses to property developers to investors with their property needs in completing transactions, overcoming obstacles and advocating their position in dispute resolutions, as well as advising them on commercial matters. Andre, thank you for joining me today on the REDL Chat. And if we could start with a bit of your story and how did you get started in your legal business?
Thank you very much for inviting me into the podcast, Alan. Certainly great to talk to your audience. In terms of how I got started, I've always had an interest in helping people. And when I decided to undertake a legal career, I thought, well, what's the fundamental thing in everyone's lives? Obviously, having a home, having that sense of security. And then as you delved into the industry more, into the property world, you realize actually this is also a great vehicle through which people can improve themselves, improve their situation, improve their lives overall for themselves and their families. And that just obviously got me much more interested into delving deeply into property and then focusing my legal career, legal skills into the property world.
Okay, beautiful. So the theme of this podcast is about the REDL board game, which you've seen in the past.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bring all the real estate players together, like property lawyers, architects, town planners, and so on, into the game, and each of them would act as their specialist expert in their own field. So if you were to explain to a 12-year-old kid, what do you do in a very simple terms, what it would be?
Yeah. Well, I think at a very basic level, my job and any lawyer's job really is to help people through their lives and to facilitate the different things that they're trying to achieve. In terms of the board game specifically as an anchor point, all of the steps that you're taking have legal elements. Your leasing, licensing of particular properties to have access and use, development issues and development hurdles that you might run into along the way. Those are all things that a property lawyer can assist on, and we can work with individuals to make sure that they achieve their goals in the end, because people do run into these roadblocks and they need that specialist knowledge to be able to help overcome those things and reach their end goal and achieve the project. So for a younger audience, it comes down to just that. The world has different things happening in it, and we as lawyers, our job is to work alongside our clients to get them to where they're going, help them to overcome those hurdles.
Right, yeah. I guess, if we refer it back to the game, in the game, there's a number of phases from acquisition all the way to title and settlement.
Yes.
There's a lot of legal aspect from acquisition to design and approval to even tender and contract. So you guys would be reviewing the tender document before it goes out to builders and so on. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think the important thing there to understand at a very basic level is that each of those steps, yes, a lot of the time can be viewed as very standard, but getting that advice at the start early on saves a lot of headache and trouble down the track. Because if you miss a key trick or a problem at the start, that problem will just grow and grow and grow as the project continues. And the last thing that you want to do is to have that problem suddenly land in its larger size towards the end of the project. And all of a sudden, everything that you've worked towards is at risk and may come down crashing around you. So our job through each of those stages is to make sure that people are aware of what they're getting themselves into, especially on the contracting and tendering side of things, there are things in life that are outside of anyone's control. How are we allocating that risk? How are we making sure that there's a fair division between, say, a builder and a developer as to who's going to have that liability if there's a bit of a delay, if there's cost increases, if there's completely unexpected things that happen on site? What about insurance issues? All of that comes into the picture.
I guess if we refer back to the game again, we adopted the concept of, if someone wants to do it themselves, there's always a major risk there, and not engaging a professional service to help them acquire, or to help them review their contract and so on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's all about the knowledge that's there. And certainly, as I said in my early description about our role, we intend to work alongside people. So we're giving knowledge and access to our experience and our, I guess, interactions within the industry as a whole to help people avoid problems that we see, have occurred to others, and to help them, even if they are doing many things themselves. And obviously there's a cost balancing exercise in any project. Even if they're doing many things themselves, being well informed and well armed is going to make all of the difference as a project proceeds. Because at a very basic level, you don't know what you don't know, and it's good to get that advice at the start, just to give you a little bit of that benefit of the experience and history that others have had.
Totally true. Yeah, because some people might say, okay, we've done a couple of projects, we know the contract, in and out. Let's just use the same contract on a different project, copy and paste, and so be it, and not engaging the lawyer again. So what would you say in that situation?
Sure. So certainly maybe that contract might be 90% right, in each circumstance to another. Every property has its own little twists and turns. And it'll be that twist and turn, that 10% difference, or it might only be a 1% difference that will actually cause the problem at the end. And once time becomes a key factor, once the costs are a big issue because you've outlaid all of the development costs and you haven't got any money in the door yet, that's when you're in a very vulnerable position as a developer. And you have to be careful of putting yourself in that position without having some balances along the way. And that's where, and I think anyone, when they're interacting with whether it's an accountant or a lawyer, is to be clear on the scope of what you're asking them to do. So, like I said, the costs are definitely an issue that people need to factor in. And the question there is to be saying to your lawyer, look, this is an agreement I've used multiple occasions without issue. I know it inside out. I want to be using this form of the document, but for this particular project, can you just limit what you're advising me on to X, Y, Z specific aspects to deal with that property or that project, so that at least you get that risk analysis to go, okay, they're not reinventing the wheel from scratch. The cost should not be as if they were doing the whole thing from nothing. In a very limited circumstance, they should be able to give you that advice just narrowly on what you need, and obviously the costs will be lower on that basis. Lawyers all have a professional obligation to be telling you upfront what the costs are going to be, and so have that discussion always. As with everything else in the development sphere, feasibility is key. So always have that discussion about price at the start, so that you're not in for any surprises towards the end.
That's it. Yeah. So in your earlier years, how did you learn your craft? Did you have a mentor or coach to sort of help you along your professional journey?
Sure. Yes, most certainly. I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, you go through, you obtain your degree, but even that is just a basic starting point in terms of equipping you with some basic legal knowledge. Once I got out into the profession, David Sharrock, who's retired now, but who was the principal of Sharrock Pitman Legal, he was my mentor and primary trainer, I guess, working through the early parts of my career. And I think he's always left me with a great sense of customer centricity, the importance of being able to focus on your client, on the person who's actually conducting the project, to make sure that you're giving them what they want. You're not getting caught up in the technical aspects of what you're doing. There's unfortunately, I guess, a lot of lawyers who can get caught up in the puzzle a bit of the legal issue.
Yeah.
But the main thing is to focus on what the commercial intent is. We want to get the project done. You want to get the deal over the line. What are the options, alternatives to achieve that, and not get stuck in, I guess, the puzzle elements.
True. Yeah. I mean, especially these days, with a lot of legal jargon, sometimes developers get lost in that sort of debate,
Yes.
and not understanding what's the real issue at stake here.
Yes. And as lawyers, I think our job to a degree is to translate that jargon and to be focusing it back at the end of the day to what we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to achieve a build to sell project, a build to rent project? Are we making sure that we're getting those right returns, making sure from a financing perspective that all those obligations are covered off, and what about quality obligations to the purchasers who might be buying these properties at the end of the day? And it's really bringing back whatever the issue might be to those key considerations that the developer has at the very start. You have to, as a service provider into the industry, understand that it's the developer, who's running the project and taking the risk, whose intent you really need to understand, and you have to gear your service towards meeting that intent.
Okay. So what are some of the major legal issues you're seeing these days in the property development industry, and how could these be mitigated or avoided?
I guess something that comes up very frequently at the very talking about a multi-stage sort of situation as in the board game, running through each of these aspects. When you're looking at the acquisition phase and you're looking at a particular property, have a mind to what are the actual restrictions that might already exist. Is there a covenant that happens to sit on the title? Are there planning issues that might be coming up beyond what you might just be able to Google out of a newspaper website to say, okay, there's this development and that road's changing in the area, etc. Dig in deeper depth, call someone at council to have that discussion, call your lawyer to look through the title, the contract and the vendor statement ahead of time to see what you're binding yourself into. It's not unusual with some of the newer developments to have covenants in place to say, you must develop your particular block within a certain period of time. Well, actually, does that fit in with what your intent is, especially in some of the more greenfield areas of different cities? That's one of the issues that has come up. On the, I guess, enforcement compliance side of things, council will certainly be looking more closely at compliance. If you're removing covenants or dealing with covenants at all, then lawyers are going to be mandatorily involved in that process. Councils will want interpretations. So it's important to know and factor in that these issues will come up. If you're looking at a particular piece of property, there are these issues there that obviously getting legal advice you're aware of. Factor that into your project timing. Make sure your feasibility factors in that this might be a 4 to 6 month issue to overcome. If you factored in the holding costs within that period of time, or have you pushed out your settlement dates and given yourself the right to be able to deal with that during the contract period? So just be aware that we've moved into a more litigious and compliance-based environment, and government authorities are certainly looking more closely at projects and at developers to make sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed. And from the developer's perspective, unfortunately, that means money and time, and you really need to factor in those risk elements and have a buffer in place to deal with that.
Right, yeah. Because sometimes there's always argument about, a conveyancer have enough knowledge to cover some of the legal aspect. Why do I need to talk to a professional lawyer in property law? Yeah.
I think that the distinction is, and we do help conveyancers in our practice. So I certainly have a lot of experience with conveyancers, and they do their part of the job well, certainly. You are tasking them to run through the process of the conveyance, not necessarily give full and in-depth advice on the development prospects of the particular piece of property. Some conveyancers do have experience in the area, but don't have the legal background necessarily to go through what the consequences are going to be through the rest of the development. They might be able to tell you, say, that a covenant is there, but they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you the likelihood or risks of trying to remove it or vary it. So that's where there's a bit of a crossover. And this goes back to making sure that when you're talking to your lawyer, that you're giving them the scope of what you want. Because, for example, from a cost balancing perspective, you might say, okay, a conveyancer is going to do the actual physical conveyance, but I just need advice on X, Y, Z elements of the property or on particular, say it's the construction contract side of things. Yes, the property is being conveyed via conveyancer, but the lawyer is now getting involved to deal with the tendering process, to deal with the building contract.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of risk control and preference in some respects, because lawyers or specialists in particular should be able to give you more peace of mind as a developer that, okay, I'm going into this project with my eyes open. I understand the risks that are there. I have factored in the right contingency levels to make sure that those risks are factored in. If the risks don't eventuate, fantastic, you're ahead of the game.
True, so true. I mean, especially with a lot of developers coming from a property investor background, they've always been, mainly dealing with conveyancer in their past transactions, and they think, okay, conveyancer is experienced enough, but somehow, they are dealing with.
Yes. And that's the thing, like you need to know, whether it's a lawyer or a conveyancer for that matter, the background of your service provider. Because someone that's done a whole lot of existing residential purchases and sales for an investor, for example, they're not looking at the same things, whether that's a lawyer or a conveyancer for that matter, they're not looking at the same things that a lawyer who's experienced in development work is looking at. If we as lawyers know that you're buying this property to build a particular sort of project, okay, you might be buying 3 side-by-side blocks and you want to construct a small apartment building, for example, the considerations in that and then looking through the planning scheme are different to someone looking at an average suburban block and wanting to divide it into 2 or 3 townhouses. So it's that kind of experience that you're looking at to be saying, okay, am I getting the right sort of advice? Is my professional gelling with the kind of risk and information that I'm after? You got to make sure that your lawyers are focused on the commercial points, what you're trying to achieve, not just the legal situation of a particular property.
Yeah, that's so true. And also from a development perspective, you should always budget those costs, in your feasibility study anyway. So, yes, lawyers might cost a bit more than much more than a conveyancer, but at least it will give you that sort of safeguard in terms of potential litigation.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like expending those costs at the start, albeit it's not the best time, obviously, because money's going to come in at the end of the project.
Yeah.
It will be a lot cheaper fixing the issues, or at least knowing about the issues and having strategies in place to deal with them at the start, versus finding it out at the very end and then sort of chasing your tail to try and get it right.
Yeah.
And worst of all, getting into litigation, and we have been doing a lot of, and it's a bit of an insight for your listeners, we have been doing a lot of construction litigation because, especially on development projects, through the last year, it's been obviously very publicized issues with respect to shortages of materials, shortages in people, rapid increases of costs. So there has been a huge amount of friction between developers and builders, and projects that have been substantially delayed, and some builders even walking off sites. And at that point, if you're in the middle of litigation or having to pursue litigation to enforce your rights to get a level of compensation, it's going to make your profits evaporate ultimately. And having considered those issues at the start, those risks at the start, will create pathways for some of those clients that we did do that advice for. It's created other pathways for them to be able to resolve the issues with their builder and reach a commercial position. They're not necessarily going back to absolutely square one, what would be the developer's ideal position, of course, because the problems have arisen, the world market is what it is. But because of the rights that are there, it's given them enough leverage to be able to reach a fair deal.
Okay, that's an eye opener. I mean, sometimes it's good to have those extra clauses in the contract in case something bad can happen, and then at least you got some leverage to get back.
Yes, exactly. It's the leverage. It's the leverage that's the key, because you are not necessarily going to want to engage in commercial litigation. You head into the Supreme Court and you will be up for, many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal costs. To what benefit ultimately if you could have had those issues addressed at the start when people's relationships were much better, and to at least create the pathways to give you enough leverage if relationships deteriorate, to be able to at least get it a little bit more your way.
So true. Okay. So if you were to go back to teach to yourself, younger self, or teach to your kids, what would you teach them?
I think in terms of lawyers' perspective and a service provider generally, it's to be focused on your customer, to be focused on the person you're providing the service to, and to understand what they are trying to get out of the transaction, trying to get out of the particular matter that you're dealing with. It's not about the technical ins and outs of whatever is the task. It's actually what the end goal is, and make sure always to be practical in the resolutions. Don't just think about, okay, it's a mathematical equation here. It's like you're trying to work this out. What are the different mathematical ways you're going to get to a result? It's not that. Ultimately, it's a human situation. Whether it's the client that you're working for or the other party, you've got to look at that people element and to focus on the practicalities. You want to deliver a practical result, and people will appreciate the practical result more than the technically legal one per se, because the technically legal one may well be the long way around, the more expensive way around. Yes, formally correct, yes, but not practical in terms of achieving what the developer, the customer, actually wants.
So it's a bit of a compromise between the litigant and the client, and so
understand the balance. Litigation, like looking at a dispute as a good example of that. Certainly at the very start of any dispute, your client will always be wanting to be as aggressive as possible, going into court, having that fight, because they feel like they have been wronged. The other side has done the wrong thing by them. How can they get away with this? It's a point of principle. But the reality of that, as an experienced lawyer, is to be saying to them, yes, we understand that you've been wronged and that the other side have done a bad thing to you. But now you're really in this situation already. There's already a negative impact on you. How do we get out of this situation in the best way possible, limiting your cost and loss, and still enabling the project, the actual focus of what you're doing in the first place, to continue? And sometimes it takes a little bit of time for people to understand that, and the process has to continue. And sometimes you do have to be aggressive on the litigation process to give yourself the leverage. But it's always important to have that end point in mind and not just keep blindly running through the process because it's process. You want to be focused all the time, and to keep the client focused all the time on what's the best outcome for them. And even though, okay, it might be very annoying that the party that's done the wrong thing might, from some perspectives, be getting away with it, in inverted commas, it still will be the best result at the end of the day, once you know the client's already in this hole.
So that would be a discussion between, like lawyers and lawyers representing their specific client. Yeah,
it's to be, and to be, for your own client, to be transparent about the fact. With the other party, it's about being, and the other lawyer, it's about being, I guess, very careful and use your judgment as to, sometimes it's sensible to share this information because you both are on the same page about trying to get the best outcome and negotiate a way through. Sometimes in the more aggressive parts of the proceedings, it's better to have everything close to your chest, basically, and just be very aggressive because you're trying to gain that leverage. So these are all tactics this is why you ultimately retain an experienced lawyer if you're in a dispute situation, to be getting that insight, to be going, okay, this is the right time to hold back, and this is the right time to share, and let's get a practical solution.
So it's sort of a high intense negotiation type discussion between those two lawyers, and see what is the best outcome for both.
Exactly. And going back to the question in terms of what you would be telling my younger self, it's to be to know in that situation that you've got to focus on what the customer's intent is on the overall project, and then to be laying out your cards in the best way, whether that's being aggressive or sharing in terms of trying to achieve an outcome, laying out your cards in the right order to get that outcome at the end of the day. There are times when you have to be procedural and hold everything back because it's gaining your leverage. And there are other times when you want to be sharing and trying to make the other side almost feel like the other lawyer, that you're almost on the same side trying to get this deal in place. You know, it's trying to get that balance. It's people management at the end of the day.
It is. It's also about, trying to build that sort of relationship and see, okay, how can we get this to work without going through court and all those high costs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if there's one thing you would want to do in your lifetime, what is it and why?
Well, I mean, in terms of the one thing, I think ultimately it's about leaving a good legacy. I as a principal lawyer of this firm have a lot of input into a lot of the junior lawyers, especially obviously in my property team, and inputting into their growth, helping them understand the commercial life cycle of things, and improving their legal skills, but also practical commercial skills in terms of helping our clients. That's really leaving a great legacy going forward. So if it's the one thing that you want to kind of leave behind, it's that good legacy in people, to be able to better their lives and their clients' lives. Ultimately, I think it's a great thing to leave behind.
To leave behind, exactly. Okay. And lastly, but not least, any final words of wisdom you would like to leave with our audience today?
Well, I think I think the board game is actually a great example of this, in that everything progresses in stages. Understand what those stages are, start to finish, and from a legal perspective, but also commercial and other experts, get that information, educate yourself through each of those stages, and get the information at the start. Because if you find something out too late or at the end, that's when it's going to cause the most problems. Allocate your resources to get yourself that right education at the start of those stages and understand the stages that you're going through.
Excellent. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you for your professional services, Andre?
Yeah, absolutely. So by all means, they can have a look at our website, sharrockpitmanlegal.com.au, and you'll have my profile on there. Otherwise, they can email me at Andre, ANDRE, at Sharrock Pitman, so SHARROCKPITMAN.com.au. They can email me on that. And by all means, always happy to have a chat, and for your listeners' sort of benefit, I'm always happy to have an initial call and discussion with people to work through what they might need without cost. And we work on a fixed cost basis anyway, so we'll always tell you upfront what the costs are going to be before you start incurring anything.
Yep, beautiful. Yeah. Okay, Andre. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for being on our REDL Chat today.
Not a problem at all, Alan. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, listeners, for your time.